Hello, I'm Rupen Seoni. I lead an industry practice area at Environics Analytics. I've also had the pleasure of being part of the MobileScapes leadership team over the past few months. Today, I'm going to show you some MobileScapes data in action. We'll look at some big picture Canadian behavioral patterns in 2020 by analyzing changes in Canadians' movement. We'll also apply MobileScapes with other EA data to learn about changes to a local shopping and entertainment strip so you can see some of the data in action. Just as a note, when we did this analysis, we used the most current data up to the end of October. A few things about MobileScapes. Just remember, it's privacy compliant. Data are anonymized 3 different ways. It's consent-based. All device owners opted in. We use multiple sources for proper coverage in Canada. We found that to be a challenge with single source data in this country. And we use a dynamic method to weight and project the data to the Canadian population, which allows for reliable comparisons across areas and over time. And MobileScapes is of course linked to all of EA's vast set of other privacy compliant data to make the mobile data actionable. Basically, we've taken the work out of using mobile data so you can focus on the insights and actionability. There are 3 components to MobileScapes. One is called Out and About. These are weekly estimates of Canadians' movements from their home postal codes. The second is called MobileScapes Envision, which is the ability to measure movement into buildings, shopping strips, or other destinations. And finally, we have something called MobileScapes Plus, which is a customized set of data pulls for mobile movement data for highly specialized needs. So let's start by looking at some high-level changes in Canadians' behaviors this year. You may recall the coverage back in April about movement of populations in the US and Canada. The New York Times published an analysis at a county level in the US showing who was staying home versus going out at the height of the lockdowns. Here at EA, we did extensive analysis on Canada that was published in the Globe and Mail and on CTV. So what's happened since? If we look at our out and about data on a week-by-week trend, just under 80% of Canadians went over 500 meters from their home postal code pre-COVID. At the depth of the spring lockdown, that number had dropped to 58% as people were staying home. Now, over the summer months, we saw a recovery. By Labor Day, we were back up to around 78% of Canadians moving out from their homes. Then we dropped back to 70% by Thanksgiving. So during that period, that 5 weeks, 8% fewer Canadians were leaving their home postal codes between Labor Day and Thanksgiving. What we're seeing now since then is it's starting to bounce back despite the second wave. Now, when I saw those numbers, my reaction was that this is a pretty modest change in behavior given the concerning infection numbers that we've been seeing over the past couple of months. That's when I realized that looking at some other metrics might tell more of a story. So let's add a distance measure, the maximum distance traveled for people who have moved out and about from their home postal codes. And then you see more movement in these numbers. Pre-COVID, typically 12 to 14 kilometers was the maximum extent that people would travel. But that number was cut in half by the spring lockdown, so people were really staying home. There wasn't anywhere to go, I guess. By Labor Day, those numbers had recovered to about 12.7 kilometers. From Labor Day to Thanksgiving, in 5 short weeks, Canadians moved around 25% less. The average distance had gone down to 9.5 kilometers. When you look at a more nuanced measure like distance, you start seeing that Canadians are still going out, but they're limiting the amount that they actually move around. If we look at another measure, the actual minutes spent out and about in communities, we see even more changes over this time. Canadians' time spent away from their home postal codes dropped to just 1/3 of their pre-COVID levels during the spring lockdown. So people were really staying home. When they were going out, they weren't doing a lot. They weren't spending a lot of time out. From there, the number doubled by Labor Day. So it was about 2/3 of pre-COVID levels. So we'd seen quite a bit of a recovery. But then once again, between Labor Day and Thanksgiving, as infections began to rise, we saw a 23% drop in the time people were spending away from their homes. So since Thanksgiving, we see that number trending upward again, which could be a concern for infection control, but perhaps it's a boon for some of the businesses out there. Out and About can also measure trip purpose. We look at things like commuting to work or school, visiting recreation spaces, commercial visits. This all helps understand why people are going out and what the trends are for different types of activities. If we look at Canadians going out and about for commercial purposes, they dropped from the high 50s, so about a little over half of the population in a typical week pre-COVID would go out for a commercial purpose more than 500 meters from their home. That number had dropped to the 30s during the lockdown. Now, commercial trips over the summer recovered into the 40s and has stayed there since. What's remarkable here is that the percentage of Canadians going out for commercial and entertainment purposes seems to have stabilized well below previous levels, but as things have opened up, it's stabilized. Even though things have shut down to some degree, we're seeing that number not moving all that much. Of course, maps always help understand patterns. We love maps here at EA. We mapped our commute to work or school variable for weekdays during October 19th to 25th for the Montreal area as an example. So what you can see here is that there's a high degree of variability from neighborhood to neighborhood. And this is really important to understand if you are trying to reach commuters or you're trying to reach people staying at home. The downtown core is quite different. There's very low levels of commuting in the downtown core in Montreal, whereas the West or East Island or the suburbs to the north and south of Montreal actually have much higher levels of commuting. Let's turn to MobileScapes Envision. What we're going to do is look at a geofenced area to show you how to apply MobileScapes more locally and in conjunction with EA's other rich data. I was quite keen to look at an area I'm very familiar with, the Danforth Strip in Toronto, where I live. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a well-known strip that includes shops, restaurants, cafes, and theaters. The stretch between Broadview and Pape Avenues includes part of Greektown. It has a subway line running under it and serves residents in the immediate area. And it's also a destination for people all around the city looking for eating places and other entertainment activities and shopping. This summer, the City of Toronto also started a pilot to remake Danforth Avenue by adding separated bike lanes and allowing restaurants to put tables on the street as part of the COVID response and reducing auto traffic lanes. So there's a lot going on here. Let's look at what's been happening to visits to the area. I've picked some time periods over the past year or so, and consistently before COVID, for every 2-week period, you would see about 250,000 visits. And that seemed to hold through the summer, fall, and winter months. This number dropped by over half to 108,000 during the height of the spring lockdown. So obviously the businesses on Danforth would have been affected quite dramatically by the lockdown. Over the summer, visits recovered somewhat, and they're continuing to rise slowly. What's notable here is that there's a spike upwards between Thanksgiving and Halloween, which is somewhat of a different trend from what we see at a national level, where Canadians are starting to stay home more. So it's important to look at more local data to understand what's happening on the ground in an area that matters to you. If we look at the 2 weeks leading up to Halloween in 2020 compared to last year, total visits to Danforth are down by 36%, so still a big drop. But the mix of people coming have some differences. They tend to be from close by. Almost everyone is making fewer trips, but visitors who are within that 2-kilometer zone are making only 17% fewer trips, versus the ones who are more than 2 kilometers away are making 44% fewer trips. So those businesses are relying on that much more local population to sustain them. If we put that another way, last year that 2-kilometer zone generated 29% of visits. In 2020, it was up to 38%. So those people who are close in are really important. If we flip between the 2019 and 2020 maps of visits to Danforth from the surrounding areas, you can see that concentration really clearly. What's also changed are the characteristics of visitors to Danforth. They've shifted since last year. And this has really important implications for the retail stores, restaurants, the transportation agencies that serve the strip, charities soliciting donations in the area, public health officials, and media companies with their advertising boards in the area. On Danforth, a few PRIZM segments make up a larger share of visits than before. Now you would see proportionately more kind of young-ish urban professionals, mainly childless, many of them are childless, roaming around Danforth than last year. Interestingly, a small segment of visitors, our most affluent PRIZM segment called the A-list, has actually increased its visits since last year. I guess maybe they couldn't make it to the Greek islands this year, so they are coming to Greektown as a substitute. But seriously, there's a pocket of this segment right adjacent to the strip. And this segment is less likely to be out and about generally from what we see in trends across the country. So it makes sense that they are patronizing their local strip more often. And they seem to have money to burn, so struggling businesses might want to figure out how to pull them in. Conversely, the populations visiting far less come from the inner suburbs of Toronto, where you find middle-income mix of families of a variety of cultural backgrounds. Their numbers have been cut in half. We've also looked at the changes in expenditure potential between visitor mix pre-COVID to now using our HouseholdSpend database. Now, these numbers are from pre-COVID estimates overall, but they do tell us about the shift in inherent preferences in the population visiting the Danforth Strip. What we see here is that the spending potential in the current mix of visitors is down about 5% due to that change in mix of visitors. This has some implications for businesses here. More value offerings at restaurants, there's reduced restaurant spending potential. Hobby outlets may thrive. There's increased potential for things like musical instruments, music downloads, photography. Pet shops could struggle. Their spending potential is down by 9%. Canvassers for charities may have more trouble raising money now because the population that is there is less likely to be donating to a charity. And everyone should tailor their outdoor ads according to the current visitor mix. Now, finally, if we turn back to out and about for a moment, what we can do is look specifically at the movement patterns of our key residents for the Danforth Strip, or key visitors for the Danforth Strip, which come from that primary 2-kilometer catchment area around the shopping strip. Population in that area is out and about less, and they travel much smaller distances than the average for the city of Toronto. They're less likely to be commuting to work. Probably they're working from home, given their occupation profile. Perhaps that's also an opportunity for the Danforth Strip restaurants to have a more robust lunch crowd than before, with more people being at home during the day. Residents here are more likely to be leaving home for recreation purposes than the typical Torontonian. So to wrap up, I want to leave you with a few thoughts on including mobile movement data in your analysis. 1, dig deeper into MobileScapes to pull out nuanced metrics that help you understand your population of interest in a rapidly changing market. That's where the insight gold could lie. Remember that you can define the markets you look at and compare to, so it's all relevant to your needs. You don't have to look at a predefined set of geographies. You can make it pertinent to you. Understand the changes in your market. PRIZM, expenditures, wealth data, and movement habits. Link all of this back to your marketing and communication execution tools. All of this will help you be more nimble, current, and effective in a fast-changing landscape. Thank you.